Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Authentic Podcast. Thank you guys for bearing with me. Last week I was out of town, so I wasn't able to drop an episode, as well as I had lost my voice, so it wouldn't have been a good episode anyway. But I am back this week, and I hope to make up for it. I have Gayatri Patel with me.
Hello.
Gayatri, I met Gayatri probably 2003? 2000, so around.
Long time ago.
Yeah, so over 20 years. And, so I've kind of got to see her grow in her field. And she's done a lot of special things. And I've always wanted to pick her brain and kind of just talk to her about what she does and why she does it. And so this gave me a good opportunity to do it. So welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. So I always start out just kind of doing a background. So just kind of tell me about yourself and whatever you'd like to share.
Sure. As you know, as you said, we've known each other for a really long time, so you know so much about me.
Yeah.
But I am a mom. I work on gender advocacy and policy, mainly foreign policy. I'm a mom of two. I've lived in this area pretty much my entire life, except for, stints when I was in college or studying abroad or living abroad for a few years. But this is home for me, and so it's really nice to be in this community. Still go to some of the same places I used to go to in high school, and but also see kind of the changes in the neighborhood and area, and to raise my kids here. So that's nice. But yeah, it's I just really love being where I am in life right now, and I'm taking a little bit of a career break, but also not much of a career break. I'm still in things, so it's a good time.
Okay. So you grew up in Olney.
I grew up in Olney.
Okay. What was it like growing up in Olney?
It was, from a kid's perspective, growing up in suburbia it's so boring, right? Like the nightlife was basically like the McDonald's on the corner where the kids would hang out. Or like the blockbuster movie place, or like the movie theater. Like those are the three social places. So it always felt there was always this push to like get out of the small town and do other things. But it was such a close knit community. There were 2 elementary schools or maybe 3 elementary schools, but like by the time we got to middle school, everybody knew everybody, and all the kids. And all the parents all knew each other. And so it just felt like, a safe community, a safe network to be in. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I really appreciated that until I left and had kids of my own and realized, like, I want my kids to grow up in a neighborhood like that, where, like, our next door neighbors go to the same school as us, and the parents can talk across the fence and hang out. So. But yeah, it was growing up. It felt small.
Okay.
I didn't really appreciate it until later.
Okay. And then you went out to Connecticut for college. What was
Massachusetts.
it? Massachusetts. Okay.
Which I thought Olney was small.
Oh, really?
The town I was in Massachusetts was tiny. Okay. Still a blockbuster was the main social hangout. But yeah, I was in South Hadley, Massachusetts, which is. Tiny little town, but it was an area that had 5 major colleges and universities, and so it did have a broader kind of college feel to it.
Okay. And so, since I've known you, you've always been, an advocate for, because that's not really the right word, maybe it is, but you've always worked in spaces that had to do with equality and women's rights and women equality in a myriad of different ways. And so what drew you to that type of field? Why did you make a career in women's rights?
I think it's one of those times in my life where it was like an aha moment that I always wanted to work on women's issues. Like I grew up in a family where all the women were really strong and powerful and, very, future career oriented. The education was so central in our family. My mother was just a teacher and so, it was such an important part. So I always knew I wanted to work on gender equality, women's rights. It was something innate. But then I had this aha moment in high school where it was like international relations, foreign policy, like that really moves me and motivates me. I did model UN in high school and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Like this gets me energized. And so it seemed to just naturally come together to go in a direction with my career where I'm advocating. Advocating is actually a perfect word. I'm advocating for gender equality and women's rights.
Okay. What do you think that we do not know when it comes to women's rights globally? As just American, regular Americans not specified in that issue, are there statistics or anything that you could bring up that brings awareness to sort of not the plight of it, but the state of it?
Yeah. I think the one thing that people don't know. When you think of women's rights, you think of very leftist, bra-burning, kind of like an opposition to men. And what I think is so central to discussions about women's rights and gender equality is that it's not devoid of empowering men too. It's just shifting the relationship and the balance so that there's more equality. Where it's not at the expense of men.
Right.
So that's one lesson that I think is really, really critical. The other is it's so important to think about women's rights and gender equality in every aspect of the world. It's not just a siloed issue. It's not just, oh, that's a women's rights thing. It's like if you're talking about food security, if you're talking about farming, if you're talking about health, if you're talking about response to humanitarian crises, you have to think about how are people impacted differently? And 100% of the time, women and girls are impacted differently than men and boys and others in any circumstance. With food security, when there's a drought, when there's famine, women and girls are hit the worst because of the imbalance and the inequalities in their societies. And so when we're talking about response, or when we're designing policies and programs to actually address some of these problems, we're not going to actually address them without looking at these different angles.
Okay.
So I feel like a lot of advocacy, a lot of the work that I do is busting that myth of, there are just some women's issues and they're over there. No, I think these issues permeate so many different aspects.
Wow, I wouldn't have thought about it that way. I would have been probably in the first boat where I'm thinking it's women's rights, it's more of empowerment, and not thinking how pervasive it is, and all the different parts of life, and from food to security. And I know that one comes to the forefront, being when you think about inequalities of people, being taken advantage of, but it's probably much bigger than that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you an example. Like, I work a lot on humanitarian crises, gender and humanitarian crises, and there are the issues of women's health care. If there's a large displaced population because there's a war, they have to move, live in refugee camps. How do you help the women who are pregnant or whatever? There's that, critically important. But how you design the shelters, how you design the trains, how you distribute food in a refugee camp is very critical to think through the gendered aspects of it. Like, if you build the shelters in a place that's far away from the latrines, you're going to create risks of safety risks for the women and girls who have to travel far. And so thinking about those in something as non-gender as shelter design in a refugee camp, it illustrates why it's important.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I wouldn't have thought about that. So let's start out before we get into refugees. You started out, I believe, the State Department working on human trafficking,
I did.
right? Okay. What did you learn from working on? Were you on the prosecutor side, or what did you do with the State Department on that route?
So I worked in an office in the State Department that essentially assessed human trafficking policies and programs around the world. So assessed each country based on what they're doing to address human trafficking in their country. And it, a lot of it was analysis, but a lot of it was diplomacy. So I got the opportunity to travel to something like 40 something countries in the world to talk to foreign governments about what they're doing to address human trafficking. And so some of it was prosecutorial, like, working with the legal system to advise on, okay, this is what the law should say, what it should criminalize to actually get at human trafficking. This is how you support survivors and victims. And this is how you orient a prevention plan or a public awareness plan. And so it was a lot of diplomacy and exchange and kind of technical assistance in some ways.
When I looked at that, it seemed, obviously there was a problem. So you were doing it for international, it wasn't for domestic human trafficking.
It wasn't. I did a short rotation at the Department of Justice where I was not prosecuting human trafficking, I was actually prosecuting domestic violence at the time. So I got a good sense of our legal system and the justice system. And that was really helpful in applying it. But yeah, most of my work on human trafficking was international.
And from an international perspective, were there certain regions that you felt it was more prevalent, and certain pushback from certain regions? I hear that the Southeast and Central Asia, that's a hotbed for trafficking, at least in terms of the numbers.
Yeah.
Do you think that?
So that was one thing that I actually learned quite a bit about when I was working in that office, that there's different forms of human trafficking. So there's sex trafficking, which I think is what people typically think of when they think of trafficking. But there's also forced labor, which is the other part. And I think in different regions around the world, different types are prevalent. Okay. So, I was covering a lot of South Asia, a lot of the Middle East, East Africa. And so in South Asia, I would see a lot of sex trafficking, but a lot of forced labor as well. And, some of these are, systemic issues that have gone on for generations. And so, yeah, I can't say that there's one area that has more human trafficking than others, but there's some variances in what it looks like.
Okay. And then domestically, I looked at a map, because when I thought about it, I'm ignorant to this, that's why I want to learn from it. But I thought that it would be, maybe you look at the South, you'll see a lot more human trafficking going on in the South, or maybe on the border states, because it's a little less loose, I guess. But when I actually looked at it, at least from the Justice Department, it was almost spread out. It was everywhere, and that really shocked me. You don't think about human trafficking inside the United States. And I don't think I would, if I did, I would think that it would be, like I said, very regional. But I was surprised by how spread out it really was. Outside there was the Northeast, I guess it was a little bit less. But you take that region out, it was from the west to the south to the north, and it was everywhere. In
rural areas, urban areas. Yeah. The sex trafficking is, it can be in an urban setting where there's, prostitution. But it can be, in rural areas at truck stops, or, in suburban neighborhoods. There's no place that's immune from it. Okay. It's just a matter of identifying what the risk factors are. Along the border, I'm sure there's a lot of human trafficking that's associated with smuggling. People who are migrating, irregular migration, are very vulnerable because they don't have, legal status, they don't have the protections, and so they're very vulnerable to exploitation, and that is, one of the biggest risk factors for human trafficking. So yeah, it's everywhere.
How can you combat it? What solutions, from your point of view, is is there something that can be done about it, or is a way of reducing it, or?
You know, when I was young in my career, I took on the model that was given to me, which, you know, the office had the policy that we followed was there are 3 P's. There's prosecution, protection, and prevention. So prosecution is like, you know, have the right laws in place that criminalize all the different aspects. There's so many different loopholes that human traffickers will use to bypass, you know, what we all know is an abuse. But so make sure that your laws are tight. And then make sure that your prosecutors are actually prosecuting human trafficking. Make sure that the penalties are commensurate with the crime. So you would have some countries where, you know, human trafficking would be illegal, but a trafficker would get, you know, 5 months in jail. Yeah. No big deal. Yeah. So make sure that the crimes are penalties are commensurate. And basically just have a legal system that recognizes and actually addresses human trafficking as a crime. In terms of protection, it's really making sure that survivors, the people who have been trafficked, are supported. And in a lot of cases, when it's transnational trafficking, that means like giving them the protection of legal status, so that, you know, they don't have that you know, vulnerability to trafficking. Encouraging them to serve as witnesses in a prosecution and participate in the justice system, and just really, you know, there's so many impacts from human trafficking. So making sure that your protection, your services to support survivors are actually meeting the real needs, psychosocial needs, health needs, legal and immigration needs, etc. And then in terms of prevention, a lot of it is public awareness. You know, particularly with forced labor. Like, for instance, domestic servants. Very easy to overlook the fact that somebody's in a forced labor situation when you don't realize that, like, oh, taking away someone's passport, making them work, you know, a 14-hour day, locking them in the house, like, some of that is somewhat culturally easy to overlook in some places. And so making sure that there's public awareness so that you build a norm around the fact that those practices are not cool, that they do form the conditions of forced labor at times. So I think that is important.
Do you think that that's a problem in the States, forced labor as well as sex trafficking? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think, you know, in areas where there's migrant labor, you can imagine that some are undocumented migrants. They have greater vulnerabilities and risks to being exploited in whatever workplace that they're in. Domestic workers are in a tough spot. There was actually one of the big kind of issues that I was working on back when I was at this office was on the abuse of domestic workers that come with diplomats from overseas, because you can bring you know, your nanny or your housemaid from, you know, whatever country you were in, and you have immunity. And so my office pushed quite a bit to have exceptions to that immunity for cases of forced labor, because it is so egregious. Yeah. And so there were some high-profile cases back then for domestic servitude.
Oh wow. Yeah, you don't think about these types of things, right? These intersections of law and acceptability and cultures. You know, I mean, some places more culturally acceptable, as you had mentioned. That's interesting. So you went from there, and then you started working at the Women's Refugee Commission. Was that the next move for you? Major move? I know there may have been in between.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in several different places within the State Department. I went from working on human trafficking to working on human rights in multilateral spaces, like in the UN. So worked a lot on UN human rights policy, and U.S., you know, how the U.S. would show up at like the UN Human Rights Council or the you know, other various human rights bodies. So that was fascinating. I also worked on refugees and migration when I was at the State Department. So looking a lot at migration patterns and within that, very much looking at like women and girls and labor migration. But yes, then I left and went to CARE, which is
That's right.
yeah, I was there for like 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's an organization that works on international development and humanitarian assistance. And that's where I really got kind of settled into this career of advocacy around gender equality.
Okay. But that would be advocacy on the Hill. That's not necessarily for foreign governments, right?
Yeah, not geared towards foreign governments. It was really geared towards shaping U.S. foreign policy. So like how we would design our development programs, or how we would fund development or humanitarian responses.
Okay. Wow, I didn't realize. Again, I'm learning more as I go. So
it was very cool because it was foreign facing, but still like shaping my own country's policies and programming. And so it felt like a place where I'm pushing my own people in the right direction.
Do you think that because of the position of the United States, that whatever they adopt becomes adopted, almost globally, or do you think that it, like when you're saying, could you say if you have to do these things to work with the United States, is that how you would push a policy or coerce other countries into making sure they're doing the right thing according to your values, or?
I mean, the U.S. definitely has so much leadership and influence in the world. And I mean, we used to use that argument a lot when we were talking about funding. Like, if the U.S. is funding programs that that address gender-based violence around the world, like if we're putting money towards development projects that address gender-based violence or address child marriage or address women's health issues, other countries will follow suit. They will also fund programs that support those causes. So there is like a trend-setting influence that the U.S. government has. And that's why so much of what's happening right now is so troubling, because the opposite is also true. As soon as the U.S. government pulls back, other countries started pulling back as well. And so all of these issues that we really care for, that we really, really need to see addressed, and we really need governments to support through funding and resources, are kind of left in limbo, if not just completely undermined.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of progress that's rolling back right now.
Progressing, yeah. That's sad, but I wondered that. I mean, I know in other aspects, and that's the way it is, that a lot of the times the United States push out policies that other people adopt because they need to work with the United States, and so that does give us the ability to shape things for the better or the worse. You know what I mean? So that's interesting. That's really interesting. So I don't want to jump around too much. Let's stay with human rights. Okay, what did you learn working with human rights, and that somebody as ignorant as me would not know or don't think about, and the importance of advocating for human rights? Because we see it here. I think we're talking about things on the edge, but as you go globally, the disparities in certain places are much larger, right? Yeah. And there may not be a solution without international pressure or awareness that there are problems. Like I think of, we can go to Malala Fund or whatever. Even her old story talks about education and for women and the disparities and what's needed. But I'm sure there are many cases. I remember watching a documentary on Mauritania and just the women's rights there and how they were force fed to grow up big because that's the way they can get married off, and so they eat like porridge, bowls of porridge to get as big as they can, and that's the way that they're seen as attractive or whatever, and then they're married off to other groups. And thinking about it from a woman's point of view in that country, it's different. You know what I mean? These are bigger issues in terms of human rights and gender equality than we're talking about here. And without, I didn't think about what's maybe going on in different parts of the world, because, we're so American-centric, and, but I bet there's a lot of examples that may come to mind of human rights and gender inequality that we don't hear or see because it's out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that I've learned, largely from the lens of gender and women's rights, but I think this is universal. There's such a deep connection between human rights and cultural norms, right? Like in the example you just gave, the cultural norm is for women to be larger, to be more attractive, and the underlying norm there, though, is that women should be married.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
right.
So there's...
You have to conform to the norms to be valuable in this country.
Exactly. And that's where I think there's a place for human rights advocates who are like, we need laws, we need, a system that reinforces people's right to not be married, not be force-fed, blah, blah, blah. But then there's also this longer term, kind of more iterative process of international development, social development, economic development, where you build in these concepts of like shifting social norms and cultural norms so that they are more gender equitable, so that you're kind of challenging that underlying, like, oh, why do girls have to be married in order to be valuable to society? And that's why it's important to have both. You need to have that, like, straight up in your face, like, we need the laws in the system to enforce, but you also need to, because it's so tied to cultural realities and social norms, you need to have that longer term approach to really have a sustainable solution. You're like to actually get at the root of the problems.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think, having worked on both sides of policy making, like as a policymaker when I was at the State Department, and then outside when I was advocating on human rights and women's rights through policy advocacy, like really pushing that point of we need to invest in longer term solutions, sustainable solutions, to really have something that's effective, but like across the continuum.
Have you had any success stories of things that you're proud of change, or which you consider been a change that is sustainable?
I mean, sustainable is relative, right? Like we're talking about like changing generations of norms.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we used to do when I was at CARE, when we were advocating on international development, was we would take policymakers from the Hill to
these places,
to various sites, right? To like show them like, this is what U.S. foreign assistance looks like in practice. This is why we invest in international development funding, and why it's important to like not like if you're focused on economic growth, why it's important to make sure that women are included in that.
Yeah.
And so I remember we took a group of Hill staff to Rwanda. And it was also my first time to Rwanda, so I was learning along with them. And there was a program on women's economic empowerment. Or there was a program on economic empowerment generally. And we visited several different sites. One was a women's microloan system, right? And these village savings and loans things, where the economic viability of the community had risen because women were forming these collectives to loan to each other,
like their money.
Yeah, and small loans like, oh, my kid needs a school uniform, or my daughter needs school fees, or whatever. And so just that, women lending to each other for practical needs had improved the viability of their community. We visited another site where one of the barriers to economic empowerment in the community was domestic violence. And so it was a program that that worked with men and women in a couple to address gender-based violence and domestic violence. And it was so cool, like hearing from the couples. It wasn't just women. We were hearing from men, like, I used to beat my wife on a daily basis because, I was very mad or very drunk or very, whatever. And now I've been through this program and I understand, like, this is not good for our family. This is not good for her. This is not good for me, our children, and so seeing those kinds of shifts within a community and being able to demonstrate that to people back in Washington, D.C. who are making policy that supports these kinds of programs, that was a really powerful feeling to know that we're connecting the dots.
Right.
And from that came, impetus for this legislation that we advocated for and passed on women's economic empowerment that, it fundamentally changed a lot of things about how we do international development and include gender in it.
Okay.
And so I think, incremental change has big impact.
Oh yeah, we were just talking about it before. The small steps, I'm surprised how far you go with smaller steps rather than thinking you have to take big steps. Just keeping at it will get you further along. So I'm glad we have someone like you that's out there, looking out for women across the world and people across the world, in terms of human rights and inequality. So you worked I wanted to talk about the refugees because I don't understand a lot about what happens in refugee camps. Have you ever visited a refugee camp?
Mm-hmm.
You have?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It's, not a refugee camp the way I think we picture it, with tents and that kind of thing. I've visited refugee communities more in urban settings. But I think the feeling is still a sense of displacement. Like, you're not at home. These are not your people. There's a community that forms from refugee, shared experience of being displaced, or being, not where you're meant to be. But I've worked with a lot of refugees who are dealing with trauma. They're dealing with, whatever pushed them from their homes to begin with, but also dealing with a hostile environment where they know they're not wanted in their host community, and they're dealing with the practical day-to-day challenges of housing, education for their kids, health. When I lived in Cairo for 2 years, I worked at a refugee legal aid organization where we were providing pro bono legal services to refugees or asylum seekers who were trying to get legal status, and also providing some social services or helping them get social services. And their biggest challenges were, finding safe housing. Like they were not entitled to housing, and there was so much discrimination from the local community who didn't want to rent to refugees. And so because of a lot of bias and whatnot. So there's just so much day-to-day worry on top of the trauma that forced them to leave in the first place. And one of the things that we did, which I'm proud of, and also it still horrifies me that it's necessary, but there was so much sexual and gender-based violence that some of our clients and the community that we were serving had experienced just in the process of leaving their homes.
Oh, wow.
So and they arrived to us like intensely traumatized.
Yeah.
And so, without any specialized services, without any services at all, for health or for psychosocial support. So our organization started building that out and building it into our legal services, like ensuring that the legal services that we were providing were shaped by methods that worked with people who were dealing with those issues. And I think it was a positive, but it's difficult to know that kind of thing is so necessary. And this was not the only setting in which that happens. Every single humanitarian crisis, every single refugee crisis has sexual violence as part of it.
And even my understanding is even outside of that, that sort of situation, just in general, is pretty prevalent, right? Like, is it?
Sexual violence.
Is it one? Is it? I don't want to say the wrong. You might know better than me, and I'm not trying.
It's 1 in 3.
It's 1 in 3. That's
one in
what I
three
thought,
people.
right?
1 in 3 women or girls will experience
Sexual
gender-based
violence
violence in their life. Not just sexual violence. It could, various forms of violence. There's intimate partner violence, domestic violence, child marriage, genital mutilation, but some form of gender-based violence. 1 in 3 women, and that's underreporting. I mean, this is one of those crimes or practices or whatever you want to call it that's so underreported given the stigma,
you're not going around screaming from the hilltops, look what happened to me.
Exactly, exactly. Because there's so many repercussions.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's good to, when I heard that, it was so jarring, like 1 in 3, and obviously I have 2 children, both girls, and then I have a wife, and you start thinking, it's like, well, when I start naming all the different women I know, I'm like, oh my gosh, the chances are somebody that I care about has dealt with these issues, just by the numbers. And that's sad, and it's something as a male, you're not aware of, like how prevalent it is until someone tells you. I think there needs to be an awareness. I mean, we hear about it, but that really stuck in 1 in 3. You know what I mean? That's crazy.
I have a question for you on that, actually. I mean, as you said, you are a dad of 2 daughters, and so you probably think about it more than just the average dude. But right now, there's such a kind of surge in this anti-girl, anti-woman masculinity, like where there's almost like a pushback against the movement for equality, right? Like there's this feeling of like I'm more powerful if I'm not articulating well. Right after the election, there were all of these examples of boys, young men, perverting the phrase like "my body, my choice." They would say, "Your body, my choice." Like, this kind of toxic masculinity, for lack of a better phrase. Well, I mean, are you seeing that? Are you experiencing it? And how, as a man in your community, how do you think we address that kind of masculinity?
So I don't know. When I look at it, what happened, I had a little bit of a different take. I do think that it was kind of a pushback where I think men, heterosexual men who are stereotypically men who like to play sports and be big and strong or do all the things that I think that there was a pushback that they are the problem, or that you should not be interested in things. It's not cool to be strong. It's not cool to want to lead. It's not cool to, and so I think that we were going a little bit in that direction. And certain people who aren't confident in themselves, which are usually young men who have a lot, they could kill the world. I'm the most strongest guy in the world. I'm the best. You go through that as a male. When you get into your 20s, especially at your height of your athleticism, you feel big and strong. I think that they felt a little displaced, and so when you have these hard men who are trying to push, we're strong, we're these strong men, whether it's a Putin or a Trump or Andrew Tate or these guys that are always, I want to be the strongest, the hardest, and it's okay to be that way. I think that there was an attraction to that because we've been, not me, I don't feel that way. I'm comfortable in whatever I am, but a pushback there, like, okay, I can be drawn to this. I don't have to feel like I've done some problem or I've, created some problem for me being me, or I shouldn't be interested in things I'm interested in. Now, I haven't found that whole your body, my choice, I haven't run into that. And it could just be the circles that I'm around. And I hope that that's not a big trend that's going on among young kids. That's dangerous, I find. Super, super, super dangerous. But, I think that there's room for everybody. I think everybody needs to be happy in their skin. And I do think there are a place for over masculine men. I think that there's a place for men to teach a man how, this is what it means to be a man, a gentleman, strong. That you should. It's a virtue to want to take care of your family. It's a virtue to want to be protective. It's a virtue to help people who are less than you, even because they're stronger. It's not because you see them as weak, but it's because you can help the situation. It's easier for you than for them. So that's like, I remember during this period, I told one girl, a lady, I should say, made a comment about like, men being strong or whatever, and she was like, well, women are strong too. And I'm like, yeah, I never said women are strong, but you can say, so I think there's a little, I don't know if, again, I articulating it well, but I do think there was kind of a pushback with men wanting to be proud of manly things. And with most things, when the pendulum swings, sometimes it swings a little bit too far. And then you get these fringe players, the Andrew Tates, these guys that can kind of prey on those people and make them, feel like this is the way that everybody should be, when you just be what's natural to you. You know what I mean? I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. And the reason I've been thinking about this a lot is not just because of my job or the work that I do, but because I have a son, and I worry sometimes that I've been so much about like, we need gender equality. There are women and girls around the world who need an even playing field, that I'm not messaging to him that I also care about him and his, growth and development, and that he does have a role in that idea of gender equality, but he also he should also benefit from gender equality. And so, I'm as a parent, I'm thinking through like, how do we support the young men in our lives and still push for equality in ways that are really meaningful and empowering for young women and girls, right? Like it's not a zero sum game.
No,
I guess is how do I do that as a parent? Yeah. And so it's I'm really thinking through like how do young men or how do men in our society kind of experience what's happening.
I wonder whether or not I think part of it is that there's a feeling that there's no role for a man, like that everybody is the same, so there's no role. And I think there might be I personally don't subscribe to that. I subscribe to the idea that there are gender roles. That doesn't make one equal, that doesn't make them unequal, but we can't deny physiologically, biologically, that we're different. Like there should, women are, I hate to say this, and I'm sorry I have to say some things, but women might be a little bit more nurturing naturally, right? Men might be a little stronger naturally. And that's okay, right? So we should use the advantages of a man for things that need strength, or maybe we need the women they're more intuitive, I feel. Maybe we should use women's intuition. Like these are strengths that we have as different roles, right? And rather than trying to make it seem like everybody's the same, more of embracing that we all are getting gifts just by biology and our makeup. And I don't know. That's just kind of the way I look at it. I know. I hope that didn't come off the wrong way, but
No. I mean, I see it a little differently. Yeah. I see it as well, first of all, I think even if it's a given that there are biological differences and they're, women more intuitive and physically stronger, I think we need an even playing field when it comes to opportunities.
100%.
For sure. But also just this idea that getting past those roles or getting past that biology to also be like, girls can be leaders. Like obviously they can be natural leaders, and that intuition can be part of what makes them good leaders. Right. Just like boys can be nurturing, and that being, caring, involved parents is a huge value to society. I think I think the more we can emphasize that those unique characteristics are also strengths across gender divides is important.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what I'm trying to get at in terms of like that's what I want to message to my son and my daughter, that they don't have to be a role.
Yeah.
They just have to be who they are, and they have to use their strengths to push for equality or to be equal.
And tell your son, who I just saw, who's almost as tall as me now, and he's like 10 or 11, or no, it's 12, but tell him to embrace himself and all of his greatness. All of his greatness. No, don't try to minimize things that are natural for him, or things that are more easier for him than maybe a sister. Enhance the family by using those things.
Yeah.
But embrace all of it. I would say the same thing to Camilla, but Camilla seems to be more. She's older. She's more independent. I think she hasn't. She's going to figure herself out. I think she already embraces herself pretty well. So.
Yeah.
So, okay.
It's
So let's switch subjects for a second. I wanted to ask one last thing before we switch subjects, and this had to do with, and I don't know if you could talk about this or not, but when we had the release, we decided we were going to leave Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. I know that you were working intimately with some of the women who were left behind, trying to make sure they were safe. Mm-hmm. What was that about? What was that like? What were the challenges there, dealing with, again, a very tumultuous time where you have, let's say, a change in government or a change in leadership, just to put it politely, and you have women or people who are at risk during that time, and trying to help them sort that through.
So there were things that I was doing as part of my job, and there were things that I was doing just as a person, as me. I think that's when the natural advocate in me came out, and whether it was in my individual role or for work, where it was convincing people who had the power to make decisions to make the right decision when it came to women and girls. And so that was a lot of like trying to understand what are the on the ground risks. What's the most difficult situation that women and girls are going to be facing, and certainly for a number of women who had been up until that point very outspoken on women's rights, girls' rights, etc. They were the first target for pushback, women human rights defenders. And so a lot of them were going underground. A lot of them were really fearful, not just for themselves, but for their families, which, there was clear motivation for retribution against the entire family. And so just communicating, understanding what those risks are, understanding those circumstances on the ground, and then being able to communicate that to policymakers. So, a lot of it was like going to Hill offices and being like, look, we're working with 5 women human rights defenders who have literally, their families have been threatened just in this first week of Taliban takeover. We need to get them out immediately. And you, Congressman so-and-so, has the power to do this. So there was that kind of advocacy on individual cases. But then there was like this broader policy advocacy of like, okay, as the United States, we have responsibilities here. Like we are part of this mess, whether we admit it or not. And so what does that look like? We need to make sure that our humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan stays steady and increases, and that women and girls are very much part of the design of humanitarian programs. And that's where things fall apart.
Okay.
I can't even tell you how strongly I feel about this point. When you have a humanitarian program, you cannot. It's not the population is not monolithic. Uh-huh. Women and girls will experience crisis differently, worse in some cases, but just differently, right? But humanitarian response is not always designed with that in mind. And so, as the United States, as humanitarian donors, we need to make sure that that perspective is taken into account in the design of how humanitarian programs are being implemented.
Right, yeah.
And that was such a tension, particularly in Afghanistan, because there were immediately things like, okay, women can't work. Women can't travel outside of their homes without a male guardian. Women can't, even foreign women can't, work in NGOs. And so all of the humanitarian workers are women who, or the people who would provide these services are women. So all of a sudden, if none of them are able to actually do that job, you're automatically cutting things out. And so that's a policy issue, that's a diplomacy issue. And so a lot of the work that I was doing as part of my job was to push policymakers to stand firm on this position. And not just humanitarian aid, but peace building. Any kind of negotiations around Afghanistan's future needed to include women at the table. And the United States has not just had, but has a role in making sure that happens.
100%.
And it hasn't. But I could go on and on about that.
I understand. Oh, it's a weird time.
It is.
Unfortunately, it's a weird time, but it too, God willing, should pass. But let me switch subjects, and it's kind of a good segue, because I always ask my guests, because they're all either American or live here in America, what does the country actually mean to you? When you think of America, what are your thoughts? Not in terms of the idea of America, I guess is more of what I'm talking about in terms of not what's going on in any particular time, but what are your thoughts as an American yourself?
How much time do you have? I have a lot of thoughts on this. I used to work for the United States of America, so I'm not just an American, but I'm an American that was the face of America for a number of years when I was working at the State Department. So I've had a lot of time and opportunity and necessity to think about what does America mean for me, and how in terms of how I'm representing my country abroad. It's still my country, but I think as I grow, as I learn. And I now proactively seek opportunities to learn more. As I learn and grow, I see the more of the nuances and the fissures that make me, if I'm putting a positive spin on it, really make me feel like, okay, the ideals of America are still strong. Democracy, protection of the minority, etc., the anti-monarchy. But how it's taken shape historically is a mixed bag, right? And so I've spent actually a lot of time in the past couple of years really diving into the figures that we consider great. They're not always great, right? We know Thomas Jefferson had 600 slaves. And I'm currently reading a book right now about George Washington and his checkered past. And so really taking a critical look at how the arc of America and how we are where we are right now. And then this current moment of there's a lot of upheaval and a lot of what's being put out as this is America is so antithetical to who I am as a person. And so how do I feel about America? I want it to live up to its ideals. I want it to live up to what we say we stand for. And I don't think that we're meeting that moment right now.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was long-winded.
No, that was not long-winded at all. I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. I feel the same way. I do feel there are ideals that we aren't living up to and probably never did, but I do think that we've always tried. There's been, whether it's a step forward, 2 steps back, or maybe 2 steps forward, 1 step back, we were always trying to progress to get closer to this ideal. And I don't know if there are many other countries that are really trying to do that around the world right now, right? Where they're, are trying to push these ideas that we have as an American, or what America stands for. You know, you have a right here, human rights, you have a right here to all, regardless of your race, regardless of your religion, regardless of your gender, regardless of where you come from, you come here, you work hard, you should have all the rights as any other person.
An American dream.
The American dream, the infusion of cultures, they're all fighting, going along with this sort of new world idea. I don't know if that's, obviously we see that that's under attack, and we've seen that it's probably never probably met that ideal, but I do like at least the idea that there are people who are trying to fight it. So when I look at America, I don't necessarily always look at the founding fathers or that as what my idea of America is. I do look at the regular people who are pushing, and whether, not only just advancing on human rights, but just the regular people who are do business or innovators or through science and breakthroughs, just really pushing things forward, whether they're men, women, regardless of what they look like or come from. You look at the names, and some of these names, they're not Bible names or common European names, so they're coming here from somewhere, you know what I mean? So, but that's kind of my idea of what America is, and I know we're not perfect, we never will be, and I know that it's a trying time, but I do appreciate that there are people who are trying to remind people, hey, this is what we stand for, or this is what we need to be, and there are ebbs and flows, and maybe right now it's going, but I do feel like if we look at the long-term march, we are going in the right direction.
Even now, you think?
In the long-term march, I think right now we're probably progressed, but I think this is. Some people say obviously this can be transformational. I don't know whether or not that is the case or not. I choose to believe that this is a moment in time, and that 10 years, 20 years, we'll see it as a moment in time, maybe like the 60s was a moment in time, or maybe like, the 40s where people came back from war and we had a lot of racial issues. There was a moment in time, but through it all, we still kind of try to push forward. So I've tried to take a bigger lens on the country and not let 4 months define where we are as a group, but it's hard.
I hope it's an inflection point, and I hope it's a galvanizing opportunity to go back to pushing for those ideals. I look at things a lot through an immigrant perspective. Like I'm first generation, and I asked my father the other day. My father came from India. He was the first in his community to immigrate here. He was one of a handful of Indians who was in this area. He's got all of these really colorful stories of like him and his 5 friends that were from different parts of India that congregated here, just met up by happenstance. And I'm just like, Dad, why did you choose America? Like, you could have gone to England, you could have gone to Australia. There's so many different places, and my world would certainly be completely different had he chosen anywhere else. But why America? And his answer was very clear. It was like the opportunity here. There's no place like America. There's no place where you can be an immigrant and have all the opportunities to be successful.
Yeah.
And that's compelling. And I asked my mom the same question, and she had different, a parallel approach to it. But it just makes me sad that ideal seems to be chipping away. Yeah. So I hope that we can restore it.
I agree. And I think that we are spoiled in the fact that we look at immigration as a bad thing, but in most places around the world, they're dealing with a talent drain. Mm-hmm. Most of their biggest and brightest and motivated people can't stay in their country and have to immigrate to spread their wings to make a living for themselves. And we are the recipient of a lot of the biggest and brightest and smartest people from all around the world, making our country stronger. We have and I don't know if people recognize that, no, we really do. For us to compete, for us to continue to stay strong, we need this infusion from generations of new ideas, new people, new takes on life, to be holistically strong and not just say we're strong. I would say Americans, we have a big population, so we're going to get a group of people who are going to be, do fine. But if you add a whole other group of people on top of it, it makes it much, much, much harder. And I think that's an advantage we have that maybe the Chinese, I don't know how their immigration, or places in Europe who are, which now there's a big pushback there, but they don't have it. But think about countries in Africa, where, my wife's Tanzanian. I remember going there, and these people are bright. They speak 3 or 4 languages. They're engineers. They have all that sort of stuff. They're highly qualified people who can't get a job, can't stay. You know what I mean? And I would rather have the brain gain rather than the brain drain. I do think that makes it stronger.
Yeah.
So what inspires you? What gets you going? How do you continue to move forward on the day-to-day? What gets you motivated and inspired?
It's hard to put it in words. I think injustice inspires me. And
Okay.
then the push for me is, if I can do something, I want to be doing it.
Okay.
If I can be doing something to address an injustice, I want to be doing it. And for so long my career has focused on that, as pushing back to help suffering of women and girls and refugees and those who are displaced, those who are disadvantaged. But I think even broader than that, learning, making sure that I understand, I even in our own community, pushing for inclusiveness, as not just as a buzzword, but an actual inclusive environment where people who are different can still be part of the mix, can still have opportunities, can still be supported and thrive. And so it sounds so cliche, but I do really, that's what gets me energized. If there is an injustice that's happening, I am bothered to the point of wanting to act. And then I think, I think that could summarize it.
Yeah. So how did? Okay, I'm sure that's 100% right, but I find that people need to find something on a more granular level, or at least I do, right? So I have to find things daily to make me want to keep going forward, to make me say, regardless of what crazy things going on around the world, I have a goal. Mm-hmm. I got people I have to take care of. I'm going to hold on to this, right? And this is going to move me forward. It's going to make me take steps forward. I don't know whether you have or you haven't or whatever, but I would say, I've told everybody, try to find that, to do the mental work to find something to hold on to, because it might get worse before it gets better, but you still have to do what you have to do, and you have to do it through. You have to be motivated to do it, which means you have to be inspired, right? Yeah. And sometimes small little glimpses of inspiration is enough to kind of push you through a day or through a week, So.
And that's what I want to learn from you. How do you, I recognize that my ability to focus on bigger picture injustices is very much a reflection of I'm privileged. I'm safe. I'm healthy. My family's healthy and safe. I live in a great supportive community. I can think about
Bigger
other things.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, they're at the end of the day, things can get a lot worse. What is the core of what moves you and motivates you and keeps you going? And I think our answers would likely be similar, like our families, the security of our families, and that absolutely motivates me on a day-to-day basis. Like the little things I do to, the bigger decisions that I make are the underlying factor is this going to help? Is this keeping my family whole?
Whole, yeah.
A
different one thing that I think we have in common, but we approach it differently, and I wanted to have a better understanding because it doesn't work for me that way, right? So I think we both like to give back and we're willing to use our time and efforts to help other people, right? But for me, and maybe it's because of the instant gratification or maybe not instant, but short-term gratification, I can do that with people that I interact with, right? So I might see a kid who has a dream and wants to do something, and I can get you. I probably can't get you all the way there, but I can get you closer.
Yeah.
So I will take all my energy to try to help this kid, whether it's through a sport or through an education or through whatever the case might be. Just do my part to kind of help, right? And I feel maybe there's some sort of instant gratification with seeing that through, like putting all my effort in that way. But I think you have that same calling, but you do it with people that you might not ever meet, know their name, and that's harder for me, to understand how to have that same sort of yearning and motivation to help others who you might not come in contact with.
I mean, for me, it hasn't always been static, right? Well, two things. Number one, I think real people that I have interacted with keep my eye on the ball in terms of the bigger picture thing. Like I had an interaction with one young person in India when I was working on human trafficking, who was a survivor. It was one conversation, 15 minutes. It literally drives me to do what I do. Like that what I learned from her in that 15 minutes. She's kind of there, always in the back of my mind. So it's, and she's just one person. They're a lot of the motivation is based on people that I have interacted with or seen the impact of.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing is I have been at that place where it's like this big picture theoretical thing is not working for me. Like it's not helping me feel like I'm
making a difference.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when I've turned. Well, that's when I brought it closer to home. So when I took a career break for a while. Part of that was really I was starting to feel disengaged from what I was doing. It felt very rote. It felt very impersonal. And so I took a bit of a career break to regain my sense of purpose. And part of what I was doing was volunteering in my community, working at a food bank, working with foster kids, rallying support for Afghan refugees, those kinds of things. And exactly what you're saying, it wasn't instant gratification, but it was real gratification. You could see the benefit in front of you, and that absolutely did the trick. It was okay, there is meaning to giving back and helping.
100%. Listen, that is all I have. Thank you for taking the time to just meet with me and discuss these issues.
Thank you.
I think what you do is amazing. I'm glad to know you and know that there's somebody who cares and is taking this stuff seriously, because stuff I care about, but everybody has a certain amount of bandwidth, right? And I've always wanted to talk to you about it because I know that it's important, and I know that I'm ignorant in a lot of ways of what's going on around the world in these spaces, what's going on with refugees, with the plight of people, marginalized people around the world, women, girls. These are things I want to learn about, but I don't have the tools to do it. So thank you for sharing your story and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you. This was such a kind of energizing conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you guys for listening. And again, apologize for missing last episode, but I think this one definitely made up for it. So we will talk again, possibly in about a week, and we're out.